And now, a message from Captain America.
Hi, Captain America here. So you accidentally posted an erect dick pic to Instagram and you don't know what to do next. Don't worry, we've all been there. All you need to do is follow 2 simple steps. 1. Get your buddy to vouch for you online. That way people don't think you're intentionally laying a thirst trap. Thanks, Mark. And 2. Relax. Just let it exist out there. Hell, everybody's Googling it. It's Captain America's f***ing dick, am I right? Look, the world's a pretty fucked up place right now, and America's ass might not be enough to save it. But with America's cock out there, who knows?
Go vote.
And welcome back. We're going into our deep dive now, and we've got a big one. We are talking about representation. All right, go ahead and slap that image up there, Cape. But not, okay. Well, maybe. We want to talk about representation, why it matters, and with the casting of the first mainstream Muslim superhero and many other milestones that we've seen in the in recent years, talks about representation in the media are alive now more than ever. TV, movies, media in general are just powerful tools for social change. Representation is more important, not only for bringing said change, but for normalizing lifestyles that may not look like our own. With that being said, representation isn't always positive, and inaccurate representation can perpetuate hateful stereotypes. Tonight, we're going to discuss the importance of representation in the media, starting with what that means. Cape, I think you've got to have the wrong image for representation there. I don't know what you're doing. There we go. That's much better. That one works a lot better. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Even though, god damn, that one middle one is ScarJo. Anyway, we got to keep going. Stay focused, Jake.
So, first off, Jake, let's talk about what representation means. Can you give us give us our descriptions? You know, we gotta start off with our definitions.
Yeah, so the definition, according to Webster, or according to Google anyway, that says this was according to Webster. I don't know. I don't own a dictionary, so I can't be, confirming. But it says that this is the description or portrayal of someone or something in a particular way or as a character or a being of a certain nature. And so I don't really know if that's the definition we were looking for, because to me, it's essentially diversity in media. That's how I've always looked at it, whether it be video games, TV, movies. It's essentially just like, in my opinion, kind of like making media look the more like real life looks, right? Like, right. I don't think all of us live in, like a 99% white Midwestern town. If you do, shouts out. I don't want to go ahead and turn away all those viewers in Wisconsin. But, to me, it's just seeing a more diverse cast on things, really. And it's what it actually means to the individuals that see that diversity or that representation. That's almost too big to explain in words, Mm-hmm. But what do you feel about it, Kev?
Yeah, I think for underrepresented groups is so crucial for a multitude of reasons that we could talk on for hours or days. But I think the critical one is just accurate representations of real life people who are just like you, like, I don't know, someone black playing a black character, and representing your community, and not only representing your community, your culture or your identity or whatever, but presenting that in the best light possible, as opposed to just having the stereotypical, run of the mill cookie cutter, what sort of whitewash Hollywood likes to portray as whatever group they're trying to portray at the time. And I think, and hopefully, a greater goal, a bigger picture, at least in my opinion, is that it can help eliminate stereotypes and give people a broader understanding of different cultures, with the ultimate goal with some sort of cross-cultural empathy happening, right? You saw that in movies like Black Panther. You saw that Marvel's done a pretty good job of it. It just helps sort of bridge these gaps between, ignorance and sort of exposing people to the right side of different cultures and making sure that people are represented properly, not just, based off of stereotypes or archetypes, so to speak.
One of the things that...
What are your thoughts?
One of the things I thought was interesting, Jake, that you were bringing up earlier was when you were saying it looks a lot like the world around us. And I think that for some of us, that could look a lot different than others. If I live in Austin, Texas, but if I drive, 3 miles in any direction, really, I land up in the middle of bumfuck Texas, and the demographics are grossly, different. But with that said, and frequently when I'm in, the middle of bumfuck Texas, things like representation seem a lot less important to people like that, because they see what's going on, and like the representation that's being pushed for is usually a small group of people in their opinion. But why is it important to give representation to small portions of our population, Kevin?
Like I said before, I think it just kind of helps, like I said, open the door, or at least expose other people, like you said, who may have not been to or met anyone from a different culture or background than the one that they grew up with. Sometimes we base our identities and our perceptions based off of where we consume our information. A lot of places we consume our information is on our phones, or on our TVs, and our entertainment, media, etc. So if you're being portrayed like, as a stereotypical, a negative stereotype all the time, you're going to encourage and sort of enable those people to believe those things. That's just one box. It also checks another box of just, not being a ignorant racist dick or asshole. Like if the character was written black or Muslim or queer or is a woman, whatever, right? Have that person represented, right? Don't try, put Matt Damon as a savior for, Chinese people or something like that, that's crazy to me. That's one, it's not even accurate. And two, it's just like, you guys have already won enough, I think it just needs to be accurate and authentic, and that ultimately will help, I think, in hopefully down the road, just eliminating harmful stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I think of when I think of representation for like particularly small portions of the population, well, the queer population isn't very big. I remember for me, as I got older, one of the things that helped me come to terms with my bisexuality were characters like Constantine and characters like Jack Harkness. And one of the big reasons that was, for me, such a big deal was a bit different. It was more or less because I figured that I could still be, bisexual, still attracted to opposite gender and the same gender, and still be masculine. And that was something that was foreign to me, foreign from what I'd been told in different medias and everything else. And I think that I very much kind of, because of their example, I'd be kind of adopted characteristics like them. Having that representation be good and be authentic and be true is really, really important, because, I find it's rare to see bisexual men characters, for one. And two, any character that has any kind of queerness, any male queer character that isn't automatically perceived as some kind of feminine character. And I think that crashing those kind of stereotypes that society puts out there, superheroes, people in TV series, you have the chance to kind of crash those. So representing those small portions can really kind of, it can not only help dispel negative stereotypes, but it can also, kind of make you go like, oh, I can be queer like that, and however, however way that you interpret that. Jake, why do you think it's important that representation represents a small portion of it? Why is it important to give representation to groups who may represent a small portion of the population?
Well, because I think multiple small portions of the population make up a big portion of the population. You know, it's one of those
fair.
where like, yeah, there are a lot of like cis white folk running around, right?
Right.
Like there's a shitload of them. We're in America. Sorry. Like that's just, you know, that's going to be the fact. But like at the end of the day, like there's also, you know, but all of those small, like different other populations together make up a huge portion of the population. Right. And so it's like, you know, it's just one of those things where representing that is super important. And, you know, as a like, you know, I grew up in a small white town in Alabama myself, and so sometimes what was in the media is almost the only thing you see of people outside of that small white town in Alabama, right? And so like having that representation is super important to like opening your eyes, but then it also can be damaging if it's, you know, the wrong type of representation. And so, but yeah, no, it's very important.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. What if the representation isn't positive, Jake? Does it matter if the representation isn't positive?
That's what I was almost about to say, but then I realized it was kind of coming up, and so I didn't want to jump the gun too much, you know. But like, it's huge, you know, if the representation isn't always positive. I mean, and it doesn't like. That's the thing is that like, and somebody had said it just needs to be humanizing, and I think that's such a great way of putting, you know, what representation needs to be is humanizing, because like positive is such a loose thing too. Like no matter what background you are, you can still be an asshole, and so like you know, representation could be, you know, like having somebody in the LGBT community that isn't necessarily the nicest person too. Right.
Exactly.
Like, you know, they could be dicks as well. Right. And so, but then, you know, negative representations when you get into things like the problem with a poo, that was a huge thing a few years ago where they were essentially like, you know, the only, you know, Indian person on South Park works at a 7-Eleven and has the whole thank you come again and is, you know, voiced by a white man. And so it's one of those where like, you know, is this really representation in a good way? And it caused a huge stir because a lot of, you know, Indian Americans were like, well, actually, I don't have a problem with the poo. Like, you know, like, but then a lot were like, I have a problem with the poo. And so like, you know, it's one of those where like, it definitely matters what the representation is, and it matters to have it too. Like, you know, so it's kind of like just a balancing act, I think, in a way. But that what, you know, the biggest thing that's kind of important is that, like, you know, during the like character development, if you will, just have more than just straight white folks in the room. Maybe, you know, that's a huge part of it as well. Like, and so I think whenever you like really looking at the issue of representation in Hollywood, you gotta look at the managers of these things, the people who are putting these movies together, the people who are making these shows. Like, did they have a diverse group of people making it? Because if they don't, then they're probably not even thinking about this kind of stuff. But what do you feel about it, Kevin?
No, that you're absolutely right. It definitely starts at the top, especially with leadership. And again, if you don't have the right people in the room, especially people from those backgrounds, they're not going to know what to say or create. There was a meme I saw the other day. It said game developer, new white character updates, stronger different jaw lines, different eye colors, different, you know, blemishes, yada yada yada. And then it says for black characters, large afro or small afro. You know, and a lot of that comes from just, you know, not necessarily ignorance on the part of, you know, being nefarious or being, you know, just being racist, but just not knowing what sort of hairstyles that black people ultimately have other than just afro. I mean, you should at least have some knowledge of that, but the joke was there, right? Like, the point is there's not enough representation because there's not enough representation of people who make the games or who are in charge of making the games, which we see in like games like, well, I'll get into later, like Assassin's Creed with Ubisoft. What are your thoughts on that, Dodd?
The Assassin's Creed Ubisoft stuff was something that is always, it's kind of perplexed me because I heard, I need a little bit more information from Jake because I know that you've been keeping up on some of this stuff, but I know that they've been recently getting into controversy, especially with cultural appropriation and things of that nature. But I also distinctly remember at the beginning of every single Assassin's Creed game, there's that flag that posts up there that says this is made by a diverse crew of different backgrounds. And I bought into that, to be honest with you. I thought if we're going to put that at the beginning of your statement, then at the beginning of your game, then you prioritize that. So yeah. It's hard for me to, it's shocking is what it is. It's shocking for me to find out that they've been getting as much flack as that they have for the kind of appropriative natures that they had. But am I recalling this story right, Jake? I know that you were filled in a little bit more on it as far as this Ubisoft stuff.
Oh yeah, no, I mean they definitely have been trying their best to crawl out of holes after I think one of their head developers even said something around like, we don't feature a lot of prominent female characters because, they don't sell video games. Right. And so it was one of those where like people were like, well, hold the phone, bro. A lot of female video game characters have sold a shitload of video games. Right. And so but yeah, no, it's one of those where like Ubisoft's definitely tried, in the past. But I think like that's, one of the next big things, right? Is like, are there any big companies or corporations that are championing, representation? And, I think that, there are a few out there that definitely try to. That's the hard part, though, too, is like if it's a part of a marketing campaign, like, damn, how much can you really trust it? Yeah. Like you were saying, like you bought into that little message that popped up at the beginning of the games, right? Yeah. And, so did I. And I think a lot of other people did, too. But I don't know, Kev, do you know of any other folks that are, doing really good jobs of championing representation, especially in video games?
So the first thing that comes to mind, and this is a little bit dated, but given the time in which they were making games, BioWare. BioWare has always kind of had sort of an eclectic cast of characters from a multitude of backgrounds, especially in their Mass Effect series. Now, granted, a lot of those characters were aliens, but the human representation as far as, sexual orientation, race, even the option. I remember when the third game came out, they gave you the option on the cover, they have like just the base model of Commander Shepard, right? They also gave you the option of just flipping that around and then it's FemShep, So they were pretty inclusive, especially given that's like almost 10 years ago. So it's pretty impressive considering where we are in society and then what they were already thinking of ahead of time. They actually ended up making a character, I think one main character from the first game, they actually ultimately made him, I think, either bi or gay. I'm not sure, but there was no like option for that early on. So they've always really kept an open mind, in my opinion, in regards to that. Another one too, and even though they've got some flack, and they can certainly do better, Blizzard Activision with Overwatch. Overwatch is another one that kind of has a pretty well represented cast. They dropped the ball a little bit here and there, but I think for what they're trying to do, I think they're doing a pretty good job. There's certainly strides that can be made, and certainly things that can be better in the industry as a whole can improve upon. I was on a Zoom conference about a month ago. It was for Polygon, and one of the guys, he was like, "Yeah, I worked at Game Informer, and I noticed a problem where it's like, oh yeah, this is only written for guys like me, cis white males who are kind of mad at the world, So of course that tone of voice really sort of, and also that tone of voice kind of deters other people from wanting to get interested in the industry and games in general, right? Like if you're just a toxic asshole, who are like misogynistic or racist, of course, black or women or whatever, they're going to stay away from that because it's not a welcoming environment.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Exactly. Did you guys catch the last South Park game and how it showed the difficulty level?
Yeah. No, I remember. Yeah, if you chose black, like the difficulty was exponentially higher or something like that.
That was. They said in the last South Park game that came out, like that was and it was crazy. People like it blew up, but it was right around like, obviously it was like a jab at police brutality and everything in America. Yeah. And so like if the darker you made your character, the harder the game was by
that's what it was
comparison.
Yeah.
And so like, it had people so split. Like everybody was like, oh dude, that's like racist. But then like also like, fuck, like that is a crazy way.
It's brilliant, but it's like read the room, it's like, that's a great joke for another time. Yeah. I mean, not necessarily even a joke, but it's like a joke /
commentary.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an amazing piece of commentary on society in a way, and like how it is like essentially like playing the game on hard in a way.
Yeah. For real. We talked about some of the people that were championing it. Did you have anybody that you feel were actively hurting representation out there other than Scarlett Johansson, Jake?
Actively hurting it. I don't know. Like, I think there's definitely like, because in 2020, that's where it gets tricky, right? Like, you know, people are going to be canceled, you know, these days, as far as like for, you know, the more and more lack of representation. I think one of the huge ones, and I was literally, and this is going to sound weird on Geek Life, like, sorry, but my mom was just in town not too long ago. It's got to be like The Bachelor. And like reality TV shows in general, like a lot of them, like your Love Island, your Bachelors, your Too Hot, like your basic kind of like trash reality TV show. For some reason, what have we had? Like one black bachelor in 20 years of like The Bachelor being on television. Like that's kind of ridiculous, you know, way, right? And the fact that like we never had an Asian American,
like you got two,
and Bachelorette, no, like I know that. Like nerdy culture, but shows on primetime audiences, you know, across the United States of America that lack like a ton, have never had representation, in my opinion. Like for tons of brands.
We really need to work on expanding out the opportunity for every race to try polyamory on a free trial.
Yes, exactly. Like, you know, like I don't think it has no limits, right?
Right. We should really start expanding that out there. So we talked a little bit in one of our previous shows about Dune and how people were really kind of upset about the lack of representation, the lack of especially Arab and Middle Eastern representation from a movie that takes so much of its lore off of Arab and Middle Eastern culture. But also Dune is also a perfect example for this, because this is an older movie that's being remade from a different time period, from a period where people were not as attuned to cultural appropriation or things of that nature. With all that said, should shows be canceled strictly over lack of representation? Jake, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know necessarily like. It's a tough one, because like over the complete, like if it's an utter lack of it, I mean, I know that like we had the whole ScarJo joke at the beginning, but like, you know, she's actually been in quite a few things that like, you know, maybe she shouldn't have been cast for, right? Did they get canceled? I think they got canceled by the numbers, right? Like I think people are kind of like tired of not seeing this representation. I honestly think that, and this is just my opinion, but representation pays nowadays. Like I think for everybody all across the board, even like me being just your typical bearded straight white dude, right? Like I want to see a more diverse crowd in my movies, and when I don't, I'm suspicious. I'm like, this doesn't feel real, right? And I think it's because, like you said, it definitely is different strokes, different folks. I live in a pretty big city right outside of DC, and so like everywhere I go, there's, you know, a wide cast of people, right? A very diverse, you know, folks walking around, and so it's just like, to me, not seeing it on the big screen or not seeing it in TV, it almost sticks out. Like nowadays, whenever I see like a photo of like the Republican National Convention and it's all like white people, I'm just like, holy shit, that's a sea of Caucasians. And so like and it's like, you know, I don't know necessarily, to get back on track, if we should necessarily cancel these shows. I think they should be held accountable, right? Like, and I think Dune is right now. I think people are pushing back on it. And so like, but I think like if it's a complete and utter lack of representation with also like maybe some appropriation on top, that's whenever we need to talk about cancellations, you know. But what do you feel about it, Kev?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, especially the part with appropriation. Like, if it's not even your culture and then you're not even representing people from it, that just seems not only ass backwards to me, but kind of like a slap in the face. Like, we're going to represent your culture better than you can. And I get where it's like the whole marketing mindset of is like, oh, well, the numbers say this and numbers say, well, you haven't tried anything else. So you can't really say. Like, they can't 100%. Sit here and say, oh, our audience wouldn't like a black female lead, which wasn't even true, because if you watch the Emmys, Watchmen won a bunch of shit.
It's picking up.
This whole argument about like marketing and advertising, saying that white leads just tend to do better, white male leads tend to do better, is really bullshit now. And I don't think, like Jake said, I don't think they should necessarily be canceled, because if they just fail to get on board, they'll end up canceling themselves ultimately. But I think they should be held accountable, and at least somewhat like we were talking about earlier, bring people in that can help you. Like, if you want to know how to appeal to different audiences, then bring people in from different audiences. It just seems to make more sense.
I love a whole room filled with straight white dudes talking about like how do we appeal to African Americans, you know? And it's just like like it's all just like old white men talking about like, you know, like we need more women watching these shows. How do we get more women on board? And it's like, I don't know, maybe bring a woman in the room.
Yeah, and to point out, you know, just some of what Pistachio is saying in chat, because we've got like paragraphs going on here. It looks like we got a great discussion. I'm glad to see that. But you know, you know, one of the points that Pistachio is going on there. To me, when representation is forced, it stops being authentic. I think that's the difference. You know, when it's a room full of white people trying to be like, well, how do we get black people on board? Let's make sure we have a, you know, this black character that's doing a one generic thing that helps the white protagonist. You know, that's not the same thing as actually having somebody in the room and be like, okay, well, let's actually get this character from the perspective that the character is supposed to be. And when I'm going through it and I'm writing stories now, if I wanted to create a story that might have a character from a different background than me, I'm going to, at very least, go talk to that person, talk to someone with a similar background to get an understanding, to make sure that I know what I'm writing about. And I feel like that's a minimum standard for how it should be when it comes to writing, and that should be applied to everything else, or other medias that you write for, you know?
Right. No, I totally agree. And I think that's the thing, right? Like, it's bad when it's forced because they feel like they have to. And it's only feels forced because the people coming up with those ideas or creating the content aren't people from those backgrounds. So that's why it doesn't feel authentic.
Exactly.
No, and I think, and I don't want to speak for everybody because I know 2020, it's been a wild ride. But I think like at this day and time, a lot of us can smell the bullshit.
Exactly.
I think a lot of us, like, no matter what your background is, you can tell when something's pandering, right? And you can tell when something's just like trying to be like, you know, oh, okay, like it's just trying too hard, right? Because it's just like, to me, good representation is just like subtle. It's very just like it's you know a character. It's Gerald being Hey Arnold's best friend. You know what I mean? Like, and it's things that like a lot of us even grew up on as '90s kids. It's Blade being a superhero in a superhero movie, but then the whole marketing thing not being him being just black. It was him being fucking Blade and being badass. You know what I mean? And so it's like when it's good, it's subtle, and it's stuff that you just feel like it's natural, right? And I think that's like that's the big thing, is that we're starting to smell the bullshit from a mile away, and that's where you should cancel.
And if you think that this whole like swapping out like a white person for like a black actor or something like that, or someone else to represent, is like bullshit or feels forced, ask yourself how you felt about Nick Fury during the Marvel universe.
I mean, I certainly didn't feel that was forced. I felt like that was one of the things. It felt right. It felt right, and it felt like no one doubted it because it was a perfect fit for the character more than anything else. And it's like, okay, yes, take that same standard and apply it to fucking every media decision you make. Make choices on who would be best for the character, then versus just, especially when it comes to clinging to stupid comic book trope narratives. Like Aquaman's a great example. There were people that were upset because Jason Momoa's cast as Aquaman. Specifically because there's comics that at the time that actually like make mention of the fact that Aquaman is a white man with blonde hair as a sign of royalty. And I'm like, hey, look, I don't know if you're picking up on some things here, but maybe those are some tropes we should drop, because it's sounding a little fucking Nazi-ish to me.
A little eugenics.
Yeah.
Stating.
So eugenicsy.
So I guess if I had to pick, I'm gonna go with Jason Momoa.
Loved that casting though. Like I thought it was great, and you know it's awesome that you bring up the Nick Fury thing too. Is because like to me like I can't even picture another Nick Fury right now. Like if you would have named another actor, some old white dude, like no, fuck that. Samuel L. nailed it. Give him all.
Actually, did play Nick Fury, believe it or not.
Oh wow! Oh, did not know that. But
yeah, you might
it's
take a second.
Sketched in my head now. It's sketched in my head now as Samuel L. Jackson. It'll never be anyone but Samuel. Give him all the old white guy roles.
Well, let's see. What else do I got here? Are there any characters? I talked a little bit earlier about Constantine and some characters that helped me with my sexuality. I feel like those are some of the characters I actually felt most represented by, which is weird because I'm not the biggest Constantine fan, but I did like him, in that regard. Are there any characters that have made you feel particularly represented, Kevin?
Yeah. So I think the three that really just came to my mind was Miles Morales, Commander Shepard from Mass Effect, and mostly because I could actually just make myself the main character. And then just I think, and even like the movie Black Panther, I think just the movie as a whole, not necessarily the character. I think just that sort of representation matters, because you see these people and like, you know, they're like, they're great. Not only they're well done and well developed, but just like how you see, you have a different, it's something outside of a stereotype, right?
Right.
And I think that, you know, growing up sort of like biracial and always kind of like not only just like struggling like with my own identity, like from like a race standpoint, even though I've identified as Black my entire life, just even like understanding like how like varied and diverse just even the Black community can be, you know, like the people with different hair, color, skin tone, backgrounds, you know, just off of that, and seeing that happen kind of somewhat in like Black Panther and just sort of the undertones in that, even though there were some issues with it, depending on who you talk to. I'm not going to go too far into that, but I think just like that movie was like a movement for the, you know, couple months that it came out. It was so impactful. A good friend of mine actually he saw it, and then he's seen it 3 times. At one point he took his parents. That's how like sort of impactful that movie was just on the culture in general, because it was like finally we had something that was created by Black people, not only just for Black people but for everybody. Like, look, you know, we can do things like this if you give us the chance. And that was something that, you know, was kind of great to me.
I don't even know how to follow that up. That's very true. I mean, I think that it was an amazing experience watching Black Panther. Of course, I didn't have that same kind of representation feeling, but I do remember the movement. I do remember like how people were dressing up to go to the theaters, but not like dressing up in cosplay, like dressing up in like traditional garb and like this whole kind of revival of culture. And it was an amazing thing to see. Jake, anybody that's ever made you feel particularly represented?
Oh man, Seth Rogen. Really, the first time I saw Seth, I was like, finally, you know, chubby bearded men represent. We're here, you know, like, and so get used to it, right? But no, like, I mean, one of the biggest things in my time anyway is has been any Southern character that's not fully the stupidest person in the room, right? Like that's always like. Anytime there's somebody from the South that's quick-witted, you know, like whatever, and I can't really think of any right now that aren't Kevin Spacey in House of Cards, which got canceled. But like,
that's a terrible example to feel represented.
Oh, dude, sly as a fox, though. You know, like you can become the president, baby. Like, you know, it's one of those. No, there's a lot. Though. There's a lot of other ones, and like. I don't know, man, because it's like, you know, there's a lot of stuff that portrays the South as people just being like stupid or racist or something like that, you know, or like, you know, just like kind of like loving to get drunk all the time and do like crazy shit. You know, like I think like everybody thinks of like the rebel yell mentality and shit like that. And so like I love and I'm not, you know, not to like hype myself up or anything like that, but I've actually had people tell me like, you know, I like how chill you are about stuff because it makes me feel like I can also be chill about that. Like, you know, with people that are from like my hometown, I've actually had them message me and be like, dude, you know, like you being more open-minded made me think I should be more open-minded. And so like I thought like, you know, that's fucking dope. Like, you know, great. I'm glad I'm helping like people like think about like shit in a different light, because like when you come from such a hyper, you know, like bubbles of a small town like that I'm from, you know, like there's really like not a lot of outward thinking, right? Like a lot of people aren't thinking like, how does this affect someone else, you know, in a way. And so like, I don't know, man. Anytime you see somebody that's not like a foghorn leghorn Southerner, I think is the only time I feel like represented pretty well, you know, like because most of the time it's just like, you know, well I say, you know, like get the crabs back in the pot right now, and I'm just like, dude, what the fuck, like, you know, like I say a few things that, you know, obviously make me Southern, right? Like and I do like Southern, you know, like I feel like. I hate the fact that nowadays people like whenever you say you're from the South, they think about these Confederate flag waving kind of like crazy motherfuckers. Because when I think of the South, I think of sweet tea. I think of my grandma's biscuits. You know, like I think of like, you know, just like magnolia trees. I think of like slow talking, you know, like
strange idioms that you've never heard before, like she's cuter than a speckled puppy in a red wagon, like that kind of stuff.
Like,
you know?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting dialect and language in general, right? Like with a lot of interesting slang, you know? And so like, but I don't know, man. Like that's one of the biggest things. I think like, you know, just whenever the Southerner's not the butt of the joke is always a big one for me. Or like being a bigger guy myself, whenever the fat guy is not just like some crazy bumbling, like, oh, I'm dropping food all over me and I'm farting all the time. LOL. You know, like there's it's just small things like that. It's not like it has nothing to do with race, right? It has nothing to do with my like, you know, anything of that. It's just like, dude, I get tired of like fat bearded guys being the butt of jokes that like we're falling all over the place or farting all the time or doing like disgusting shit. And it's just like, bro, like Chris Farley was amazing at what he did. We're not all Chris Farley.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Exactly.